Yo! In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a menu system in GameMaker Studio 2, complete with submenus exactly like what you see on screen right now. This is a deceptively simple, but very customizable menu box. So the first couple minutes of this video are actually going to be dedicated to showing you how to set up your own font and a 9-slice sprite. It's very short segments, but as that stuff comes up, I include timestamps on the bottom of the video, so if you want to skip all the font stuff, you can. But I seriously recommend going all the way through it. If you do go all the way through, then you'll be able to pretty much make any kind of style of menu box you might want to make with very little extra work. Alright class, let's get started. For the sake of clarity, I'm putting everything that we're going to do in this video in this little purple folder called Menu System. And I have 3 things in there right now. One is just a blank room that I called Room Title Screen. This is what I'm going to actually use to put my menu in to test it. We have a custom font and a background for the menus. So I will show you both of those super quick. So in Sprite Main Font, I have this, which is most of a font. Just a very simple pixel art font. Feel free to pause this as I scroll through, and if you want to copy it, whatever. You don't have to make your own font, but it's just a lot more smooth and handy to have whenever you're using your, everything is totally your own assets. And you're going to make sure while you're making your own or copying this or whatever that all of the characters are in the same position like this. And you're going to want to make your font in this exact order. This order is very important for GameMaker to know whenever we actually set up this font what to type. Then once everything's in the same place, you can go to Image and then Auto Trim, and it'll make your sprite as small as possible without cutting anything off of any of the letters. And here in your workspace, just make sure that your origin of your sprite is in the top left. Now we have the menu background we're going to use, and GameMaker 2.3 has 9 slicing, which is a great feature that is super useful for menus and text boxes, all that kind of stuff. It basically means that you can make a sprite background and resize it however you want, and it won't stretch and strain itself in weird ways. It also means it's very easy to do cool little animated backgrounds like this. So I'll show you really quick how to set these up. So in my image editor, I'm going to go ahead and resize these frames to 48 pixels by 48. And now you can see how it's divided up. There's a centerpiece, there's a top, left, bottom, and right. I have it animated so that it'll loop as it goes diagonally down, but you can just have this be a solid color, whatever. Then I did the same thing I did with the font, and I auto-trimmed it to get rid of all the excess stuff. Out here, we can go to the 9-slice panel, activate 9-slice, make sure that it is checked on, and then you can drag these borders to tell GameMaker where you want it to actually separate it out. If you're just using a solid color, it doesn't really matter, but if you do have like an animation or you're doing something like this, you can select the left, bottom, top, and right, and the center all separately, and switch them down here in tile mode to repeat. I think by default they'll always be on stretch, which can make an animation or something look a little goofy. Okay, and the last thing is just make sure that with this sprite, our origin is also on the top left. Okay, now that all that's out of the way, we can actually start to making our menu. So I'm going to create a new asset, create an object, and I'll call this object title menu. I'm going to set its sprite to be our 9-slice sprite that we made, sprite menu, and now let's set up our create event. So first let's declare some variables for our width and our height of the box whenever it's drawn. These are just kind of some values that I have picked. This actually doesn't really matter right now, but just for the sake of making sure that whenever we draw something, it's something reasonable looking. Next, I'm going to set op border as 8 and op space as 16. So op border will be how far our text is from the side of the actual text box that we draw, and space will be the distance between the different options. And now we can make our options. So we're going to make an array, and we'll just call it option. So we'll say option 0 equals, and we'll call this start game, because this is our little title screen. Now we can make a couple more. So let's call option 1 will be settings, and then maybe option 2 will just be quick game. Quick game. Then a variable that we will use to keep track of how long this list of options is. We can actually immediately do that by calling array length, and we want the length of our option array. So now our op length will be 3, and we're actually going to set this again in the step event because we want to keep track of this. But that's a little bit later on. So now we can add a draw event. And first let's draw the little background. So we'll say draw the menu background. And to do this, we're going to use the function draw sprite ext. So we're just going to draw our sprite index, the image index we're on, which is important if we have an animated menu like I do. Draw out our X and our Y. And then here's what we really want is our X scale and our Y scale. To get those, we will say width divided by sprite width and height divided by sprite height. The reason we do this is pretty simple. You can sort of think of it like this, where this would be, if we're talking about the X scale, this would be our width variable that we set, which would be 64, times 1 divided by our sprite width. 1 divided by our sprite width is basically just returning a single pixel. Because if we look at our sprite menu here, it's 20 pixels wide. So if we are saying 1 divided by 20 up here, 1/20th of 20 is 1. So this is just, it would be returning 1 pixel. And then we're just multiplying it times the width that we set here. So it's saying 1 pixel times the width that we have, which would make it 64 pixels wide. And that's the same principle for what we're doing with the height over here. Okay, now we're just going to set our rotation to 0. We don't want that to change. Our color will be white, which is just the blending image color. It won't actually draw it white. It just draws it exactly how we created it in the sprite editor. And I'm going to set the alpha to 1, but you could make your own alpha variable. If you wanted your menus to be slightly see-through, you could make it a little bit less than 1, so maybe 0.75, and it would be a little bit see-through. But I'm going 1. Okay, so we've drawn the menu background, and I'll actually just show you this working right now. I'm going to go into my room, and I'm just going to place this title menu object right here, I guess. And as you can see, it is drawing everything properly with the dimensions I set. So now we need to actually draw our options. Let's go back into our title menu object, and now we want to draw the options. And to do that, we're going to need our new font, which needs to be created in code first. So I'm going to make another new object here, and I'm just going to call this, say, object settings. Let's say this is going to be a persistent object that hangs out for the whole game and stores some important information that we're going to need, such as a font. So we can add our create event here. We're going to create and store a new font in a global variable. So I'll just call this global.fontMain. So that equals font add sprite, and let's pass through our sprite main font. Now for the one that I made, our first character that we're going to start pulling the font from will be 32. Next, it wants to know if we want our sprite to be proportional, which means that it will calculate the space between the different characters based on how large the character actually is. And we want that to be true. If you set this to false, whenever you type, letters like I, a very, very thin letter, will be put the same amount of space away from two O's would be, for example. If we say true, it'll act probably more like what you would assume a font should act like. And so then we have separation. How many pixels of separation do we want between each letter? And we're just going to say 1 because we have a low resolution font anyways, so 1 pixel will be perfect. Okay, so now we have our font totally set up to use. One more thing we need to do is add a cleanup event here so we can delete our font, because our font is taking up memory right now, and if we don't delete it, it will stay in memory and it could cause a memory leak, which basically means that over time it could slow down your game and crash it. So we can just go in our cleanup event, font, delete, and pass through the font that we just made. Okay, before we forget, let's go ahead and put this in our title screen room. I'll put it just in the top corner. Now, because this is persistent, just remember that you don't want to put this in a room that you're going to be coming back to a lot in your game, because you don't want more than one of these run around. it would be best to put these in like a title screen or maybe even an initialization room that you run at the very beginning of the game. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so back to the title menu. So now we can do draw set font, and we can set our new font. Now we can do a draw set vertical align, so V align. And that will be FA top, and then we can do H align and set that to the left. So whenever we draw some text and we tell it to draw at a certain point, the top left of our text will line up with that point. Now the best way to draw all these options, because we have a few different ones and we could have theoretically any number of them, instead of doing each one individually, it makes a lot more sense to set up a loop and loop through each one of these different options and draw it. So let's set up a for loop, and that looks like this. So for parentheses, let's set a variable, a local variable, so var I equals 0. As long as I is less than our option length, so the number of options that we have, I plus plus, and our curly brackets here to execute this code. What this is doing is it's saying we're starting with var I equals 0, and until I is equal to the number of options that we have, we will add 1 to it. So let's use the function draw text. So we need an X position, Y position, and the actual string, the text that we're going to draw. So for our X position, we're going to say X plus the option border. So that way our text isn't just pressed right up against the side of this little background that we're drawing here. Same thing with the Y plus op border. And then we are going to draw our options here. And so we are going to say option I. So first we have 0, so it draws option 0. Then the next time it loops through, it draws option 1, and then it draws option 2, and then it stops looping because then it's equal to the amount of options we have, so it won't run this code in here anymore. That's great, and the last thing we need to do is we don't want to draw them all in the exact same X and Y position, because then they would just draw on top of each other. So we can do this. To our Y value, we can add op space times I. So whenever I is 0, we're not adding anything else to the Y, and we're drawing option 0. When I is 1, we are adding 16 to the Y position, then drawing option 1. And then whenever we get to 2, we're adding 32, drawing option 2. This could go on for as long as you wanted it to, as long as you have that many options. So let's run this and see what it looks like. And there we have it. It's not perfect right now. Obviously, our background doesn't quite match how tall our settings are or anything like that. But I'll show you a way to do that in a little bit. First, let's make sure we can actually select these different options. So let's go back into our create event. All this is great. But now let's add another thing here, and we will call this pause for our position. This is the variable that we'll be using to actually highlight and select our options. So let's do that in the step event. First thing we want to do is we want to get some inputs so we can actually change our selection and all that stuff. So we'll just say up key equals keyboard check pressed VK up, and we'll say down key equals keyboard check VK down. We're going to be using these stored values to actually move up and down in the menu. So now we can go to move through the menu. Oops. Easiest way to do that is to say pause plus equals our down key minus our up key. If you watch the RPG videos, you know exactly why this works. And I would guess in general, if you're looking up a video on menus, you probably know exactly why this works too. When you go down, the Y value increases. So we are only changing the value whenever an up or down key is pressed, because these functions only register for one frame, and whenever you do register one of them, pressing down would make sure that you're adding to position, which makes it go down. Pressing up means it would be subtracting, so it goes up. Now we don't want our position to be out of the range of our array that we set here, so we don't want it to be below 0, and we don't want it to be above 2, because then we're going to get some errors. So you can do this in a couple different ways. I think a nice way to do it is to loop it. So if you press up while you're on the top option, it'll send you to the bottom. And if you press down while you're on the bottom one, it'll send you back to the top. So we could just say if pause is greater than or equal to our option length, then we can set our pause back to 0. And then we can say if our pause is less than 0, we can set it to our option length -1, because our option length right now is 3 because we have 3 different options here. But because we started counting our options at 0, we want to set it back to 2. So that would just be whatever this length is -1. Okay, so we are going to move up and down with this, but we can't see any changes yet. So here is a nice little easy way to do that. Let's go back into our option for loop. We will set a local variable, and I'm just going to call it _C for color. We can set it to C white first. We can change our function from draw text to draw text color. We can add our color here. There are 4 different places for it because you can do kind of gradient stuff, but we just want to do one solid color, so they're all going to be the same one. And then we set our alpha. I'm going to set that to 1 again. So this is doing exactly what it was doing before. It hasn't changed anything. But we can say if our position, our pause variable, is equal to the loop that we're running through at that moment, then we can set our new color to, let's say, yellow. So as this is looping through, if our position is 1 on the 1 loop, whenever I is equal to 1, which would be our settings here, it now knows to color the word settings yellow, or whatever we put here. So let's see if that works. And here we are. All right, perfect. Pressing down, it loops up, and if I press up, it loops all the way through. Okay, now let's actually make some stuff happen whenever we press an accept button on one of these. So back to our step event, and we're going to add a new input. I'm just going to call this accept key, and I'm going to make this the space bar, which would be BK space. So now we're going to use a switch statement to use the options. If you don't know what a switch statement is, it functions very similarly to having a bunch of if statements, but it's a little bit nicer for a few different reasons. And here's how you set it up. So let's say switch. We're going to switch the position variable, which means that this is the variable that we're going to be checking. Let's do some curly brackets here, and we'll say case 0 colon, and then we're going to add a break down here. So this is kind of like saying if position is equal to 0, or in the case that position equals 0, run all of the code before this little break that we've put in. So what do we want to do for 0? If we go here, our 0 option is just start the game. And in my case, so that would just be room go to next. So in the list of rooms that I have, it would just take me to the next room in my room order, which for me, that would be room, bedroom, but that doesn't really matter right now. So we'll comment this out and say this is start game. Then we have 2 other options. So we have one here, which is our settings, which is case of 1, add the break here. We're not actually going to be doing anything with this yet, so we can just keep that blank. And then we have quit game, and that's case of 2, add a break here, and we can call game end. And before we test this, we don't want to run this code immediately. We only want to run it once the accept key has been pressed. So we will say if accept key, then we can run this switch statement. And I'm going to tab this out to make it look a little bit cleaner. So let me test all those really quick. So first, if I press my space bar, it takes me to the next room. Then if I press it on settings, nothing happens. And if I press it on quit game, my game quits. Perfect. And now we want to see what a submenu looks like. So for something like our settings here, we're going to want to have a whole different list of settings. Stuff like window size, brightness, controls, whatever. So we're going to need to make a couple little tweaks to what we have and then add a couple more things. So first we're going to want to change option to a two-dimensional array. And we would do that like this. This way we can check what set of options we're using based on a sort of menu level, which would be a really helpful variable to have. So down here, I'm going to add menu level equals 0. And now that we have it set up this way, we can have a whole different list of, say, our settings. So we could say option 1, 0 equals window size. We could say option 1, 1 is maybe brightness. Maybe 1, 2 is controls. And then maybe 1, 3, the last one will just be back to return to the last menu. I can label these really quick. I'll just call this pause menu and call this settings menu. And now that the size of our option list can change based on which one we're in, we're going to need to set option length dynamically in our step event. So in our create event, we can just initialize it back to 0, and we can go into our step event. I'll put this under our inputs. We'll say store number of options in current menu. So we'll say op length equals array length. And now that we have a two-dimensional array, we need to provide which of these, the array itself, and then what level we're on. So we'll say option and menu level. So now everything that uses option length, like all this stuff down here, and this for loop right here to draw all the options is totally fine. Something that's not totally fine though is here where we're drawing option, because now it has to be a two-dimensional array and we are drawing a one-dimensional array, so this will give us an error. So all we need to do is make sure that we are drawing the correct menu level. So we will say menu level and then this option here. Okay, back to our step event, because we are going to be setting up another switch statement, because now we don't just need to check where our position is, we need to check which menu level we're on. So I'm actually going to clean this up a little bit and make everything a little bit more compact. So I'm going to put all of these different case statements on one line each. It's totally okay to do this. So I'm going to add this here. I'm going to move this up here. And then I'm going to scrunch them all together just like this. So that way it's a little bit more readable whenever we use our other switch statement. So let's set that up. So now we're going to switch our menu level. I'm going to tab this over here. And this is our menu level's first case. So in the case that our menu level is 0, we're going to run all of this code. Tab that out and maybe tab these out a little bit so you can see it's just one thing. And this is our normal pause menu. This is the same exact thing that we were doing before, but now we have room to add our settings menu. So in the case of 1, now we can switch our position again. And let's check what our settings were. So for our settings, we had window size, brightness, controls, and back. So our case 0 is window size. So case 0, make sure we add in the break. And we're not currently going to do anything with that. And the same for the other options. So we have our brightness. We have our controls as case 2. And then we have back as case 3. Now we can actually do something with back. Whenever we're going back from this menu, we want to set our menu level back to 0. And same thing with up here, whenever we click on settings, and when we're in menu level 0 and we click on settings, we want to set our menu level, to 1. So whenever we press the accept key it checks what menu level we're on, and then it decides what to do based on our position after that. So let's try that. Okay, so here we are. So if I go down to settings and click on it, yep, everything changes. So now we're on the second menu level here, and it gives us our new options. If I click on any of these, nothing happens, but if I click on back, uh-oh. Okay, I totally forgot to add in a certain couple lines of code. What was happening there is our for loop here was checking for our option at menu level 0, because we set ourselves back to menu level 0, but our position was still at 3, which that doesn't work with these options here. That's too many. So by the time we got to this for loop, it was checking for menu level 0, option 3, which is not a real thing. So after we've pressed our accept key, let's store the value of our menu level by saying var, and we will say SML, or underscore SML for start menu level. And that equals this value right now. Then we can go under our big switch statement here, and we can say if our SML is not equal to our menu level, then that means that our menu level has changed, and we can set our position back to 0, which is how most games work anyway. Whenever you click on a menu, it will normally take you back to the top of the next menu, or the last one. So now our position is where it needs to be, and we need to actually run this code right here one more time, so that way our loop doesn't run too many times. So we can just copy this and put it right back in here. So, and we will call this correct option length. And I'm going to tab all this out so I know it's all part of this using the options. So now let's check. Okay, so go down to settings. That's fine. It took us back to the top like it was supposed to. Everything's good. And if I hit back, then it works fine. Okay, great. Now we can fix kind of how ugly that menu looks right now. First, I'm just gonna add this because it looks kind of weird without a comment there. And now we want to sort of set the position of our menu and the different options appropriately to look nice. More than the positioning or anything like that, I think the most important thing here is making sure that our width and our height of the text box matches how many options we have and how wide they are and stuff like that. So let's go to the very top of the draw event here so we can calculate our width and height properly. So we'll say dynamically get width and height of menu. So to get our height, we're going to say height equals op border times 2, because we're going to have that border on the top and the bottom of the menu box. Then we're going to add the height of our font, sprite main font. So now we have the exact height that the option is going to make up plus the 2 different borders, and now we need to compensate for the other number of options we might have. And we would just say plus the length of our options, the number of our options, minus 1, since we're already accounting for the first one here, and times option space. So now no matter how many options we have, our height will fit perfectly. And that's that, so let's check that. As you can see now, it fits my options quite nicely, and even if I go into settings, it fits them perfectly too. But our width doesn't dynamically change. It doesn't look bad right now, but if I happen to have a really, really long option name, or if all these option names were a lot shorter, then it might look a little bit weird that it doesn't resize or anything like that. So let's get our width too. I'm going to put this above our height, and first I'm going to set a var. We're going to call this new underscore W for new width. We'll just start it out at 1, easy. We're going to loop through every option again in the same way that we did down here. So we can even just take this loop and set it up like this. Now we need to check how wide each of our options is. So we can say var underscore OPW for our option width. We can call string width and then whatever option we're checking, which would be option. We need to check the correct menu level, and then we need to check whichever thing we're looping through right now. And then we can set our new W to whichever of those 2 values is larger, because we want to find the largest width. And we could just say that by saying new W equals max Then whenever you put max, you can put any number of arguments in here, and it will just return whatever the highest number is. So we can say maximum, we're checking itself, and we're checking the new option. Now new W will be returning the longest option we have, so we could say our width equals new W, and then we'll do the same thing here with adding the borders back in for the left and the right. And now if we check that, so you see here, our start game is the longest, and you can tell that this is the same distance here. If we go into settings, you can see it resizes a little bit, and now it matches perfectly with window size, which is the longest option of these four. Okay, and if we wanted to do just one last thing, we could manually set our X and Y positions to always center this little menu here. So after we get our new width and height, we can say center menu. So let's set our X to equal our camera X. So camera get view X of our view camera 0, or whichever camera that we're using. Then we want to add half of the view width of our camera. So plus camera get view width of view camera 0, and half of that, so divided by 2. We're only adding half of that so we can get to half the screen. And then we want to subtract half of our new width value. And we can do the exact same thing with our Y. So Y equals camera get view Y plus camera get view height. Make sure you change this to height from width if you copy and pasted like I did. And then we're subtracting half of our new height. So if we try that out, okay, looks pretty centered to me. And centered. Okay, thank you for watching. The next video I'm doing is going to be a dialogue system or a text box system. In a lot of ways, it's going to build on what we did in this video. So if you're at this point in the video right now, you should be well equipped to follow that one whenever that comes out. It'll also be pretty customizable and give you a lot of options for branching dialogue and character portraits and all that kind of stuff. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. What you're seeing right now on screen is my game, Rosa Starcross. It's still in development, but there is a free demo out on itch.io, itch.io, whatever. There are links to check that out below if you want to. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, maybe join the Discord, maybe subscribe. I don't know, man. It's up to you. Hope you learned something, and have a good day. Bye-bye.